I did make a really, really bold claim about 2 weeks ago when talking about the teaching of this class. And it was in that room next to us. Maybe some of you remember, probably you don't. So allow me to remind you what I said. I said that this class would be asking the greatest question ever posed and then answering it. Which is a pretty bold claim. And here's the question. Let me just, cut all this to do about it and say what it is. I think the greatest question ever posed is, who am I? Which is short and simple and seemingly very narcissistic. Am I right? But allow me to explain what I mean by that. I think if you really understand and are able to answer that very existential question, who am I think you're able to answer about 10,000 other related questions. If you really understand who you are, you understand big philosophical and religious questions like where you came from. Is there a God? Is there something beyond this physical? Is there a metaphysical? Not only do you understand that of your origins, but you understand what you're supposed to do in your life now. You understand what's the meaning of life. If you really understand who you are, you understand that question. If you really understand who you are, you understand what your purpose is. You understand how you're supposed to live in life. Really, really big religious questions like that. If you understand who you are, you understand where you're going. You understand perhaps there's a life after this life, something beyond. So that's why I think that question is the greatest question ever posed, because it is such a meta question. There's so many questions that get answered along with that. It's a portal to all these other answers in philosophy and religion and in your personal life.
That's Stoicism, by the way.
Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to answer just a part of that question. I'm not going to be able to answer that philosophically or religiously or existentially for you, but we are going to answer that biologically, just a little bit. And we're not going to be able to do a really great timeline like I love to do, the history of evolution, from little bacteria to multicellular to fish to tetrapods to to amphibians to reptiles to cynodonts to mammals to simians to apes to humans, which I love to talk about. But we're going to talk about themes, and the reason that I'm not doing it in timelines is because some of these themes are really amorphous, and you can't even really pretend to put a good date on them. So I kind of just gave up and didn't bother.
Lee, when you ask that question, who am I?
Yeah.
Then at that point, in a biologically evolutionary sense, we're splitting ourselves away from all other animal groups, because in theory, that's what other animals are never able to answer, who am I? Or they're not able to contemplate self.
Yeah.
Which is distinctly human, as far as we know.
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing. You're splitting us away from the rest of the genetic pool.
Is that a question, or are you seeing the positive side to it?
No, that's okay. I mean,
Except the self is an illusion.
Thank you. I think I'll disappear now.
Yeah. No, I don't know that I am. I mean, I guess if you're posing that as a question, or you're posing that as a thought.
The question.
Okay. I do think other animals can understand themselves, and you can see that in mirror tests, where if you put a mark on an elephant, a paint mark, and on another elephant, you just take a brush and you put water on them so that they feel the same coolness, and then you stick them in front of a mirror, an elephant-sized mirror. They will have a reaction to that, and they'll take their trunk and they'll look in the mirror, and if it's paint, they'll touch it and they'll try to get it off and they'll try to figure out what it is. If it's just the placebo of the water, they won't bother.
Okay.
And that's been done not just elephants, but other monkeys and certainly apes, and they've done it with dolphins too, kind of a waterproof paint. So they can recognize themselves. So they have, at least at some level, an understanding of who they are. Can they ask it in the same depth that we can? I mean, that's really what it boils down to me, of comparing humans to other animals psychologically. It's not that we're drastically different. We're not a different category or a different type. We're just a different degree. You know, we can understand ourselves better. It's not that, like, communication. Everybody thought that animals don't communicate for the longest time, and now we're seeing that in many, many ways that's not true. But we have a greater depth and a greater ability and a greater range than other animals.
Well, it actually comes down to history. When when nations conquer another people, they try to destroy their history. And to defend your own self, you need some kind of ability to know your own history.
And you're saying that's where that came from, our ability came from?
Well, a lot of people have been deprived of their own history, and they suffer for it, around the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, the action that the church went through in putting together its own history, that's very important in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And retelling history is how you generate something like the American Revolution.
Yeah. That's good points. So I had some introductory stuff. Let me just kind of rush through that, and then we'll get into the meat. And because I want to give a little bit of a flavor to this whole talk too. I always want there to be context. And my mother and I were talking about this a few days ago about how that 5 years ago, almost to the exact day, I almost died from my appendix rupture. And the reason that it got so bad, because appendix rupturing is not entirely uncommon. But what made it worse was the fact that a doctor misdiagnosed it and said that I had food poisoning. Now it was giving me medicine to treat what was the wrong problem. So about 4 or 5 days went of me getting worse and worse and worse until I had a temperature of almost 105. My brain was melting. John will remember me throwing things at him and cursing like a sailor, just going mentally insane because of this fever that I was having. Was admitted to the hospital, had surgery, have like a 6-inch scar where they cut me open, ripped me open, took everything out, cleaned it all out, put it back in, and then I had to stay 8 days in the hospital. And during that time, here's my view. This is what I stared at for more than a week. An entire week I was not able to eat any solid food, which that alone would drive me crazy.
Yeah.
But I remember sitting there, laying there really, staring up at the ceiling, and here's my dispassionate, just straightforward thought that just kind of just bubbled up. My ancestors were apes. I can't fight it anymore. My ancestors were apes. Because I had this little vestigial organ that in humans is largely pointless. There are explanations that people try to give it, but it used to break down cellulose, and now it doesn't. And now it's this tiny little 2-centimeter long organ that almost took my life. And for my entire life prior to that, I had been fighting the fact that humans are a biological organism that has been around and changing for millions and millions of years. I tried to deny that. But that moment, I couldn't deny it anymore. I was trapped in that bed and had to face the truth of it. And from that, I described to Marnie last week that it's like I've just for the first time was told that I was adopted. And I've realized who my people are, who my family is, who my parents are. And for the first time, my eyes feel open to this billions and billions of year long history that to me is beautiful and captivating and sweeping and interesting and constantly being added to. We're constantly finding new hominid species and new bones and finding out genetically, oh my gosh, we're related to Neanderthals. It's revolutionary things of who we are. And that gets me really excited. And I just want the flavor of this talk, and this is way too long for an introduction, but I want you to realize that this is not a history of humans, Homo sapiens. This is your history. This is about you. This is the true myth of your origins. This is